be recording the meeting so I can post it on the Canvas page. And I'm going to also share my screen so that I can point out a few things in the syllabus and discuss the first couple of chapters. So, hi, I am Dr. Cavan. This course is, well, my syllabus says EDSP 2301. The name of this course, the number of this course has changed a couple of times, several times since I've been at Tarleton. And I think it's actually EDUC 2301 now. It was EDSP 2301 a year ago, 2 years ago. And before that, it was EDSP 3361. So it's changed several times since I've been teaching it, but this is actually my ninth year to teach this course. So I've taught it every year since I've been at Tarleton, which is almost 10 years now. And so it's gone through several changes, but the primary content of the course has remained the same. Introduction to Special Populations, the title of the course has not ever changed. The number of the course, the point at which you take the course has never changed. The course has broadened a little bit, though, in the last couple of years, and it's now taken by lower classmen as opposed to being limited to upperclassmen, which it was when I first began teaching it. You had to be a junior or a senior to take it when I first started teaching the course, and now many people that take it are sophomores and even a few freshmen. And so I think that happened because the course is being offered at junior colleges, and we want to be able to offer to our students at a similar time at which they can take it at a junior college. And so we're now offering it to lower classmen as opposed to limiting it to upperclassmen. But the fundamental elements of the course remain the same. It's an overview of special populations. Now, early on, we limited that to primarily students with what we would describe as disabilities, those students who usually receive special ed services in our schools. But we're broadening it a little bit. And we've always talked some in the course about students who are at risk for being identified as having a disability, students who might be part of the low socioeconomic groups in our schools, who then are at risk for being identified as having a disability, whether they have one or not. Students who are English language learners who are at risk for being identified as maybe language impaired, or having a reading disability, or a speech disorder, things like that. Or students who are on the far opposite end of the spectrum, who may have gifts and talents, but who are also a special population. Now we're broadening our group that we're looking at even more this year. We're looking at students who may have other differences, whether those be differences of gender or other issues that make them maybe targeted in school populations. And so we won't spend a whole lot of time with those populations. We're looking primarily at those that have been more historically identified as being our special populations. But we will touch a little bit on some of those other populations toward the end of the semester. There is a component in the course for a field experience. And we've gone back and forth on that as well. The course did not start out with that, and then we added it, and then we took it away, and now we're adding it back in again. And I'm not sure what all that is about. I think it's the Texas Education Agency, the state entity that dictates what we do in teacher preparation programs. And they are the ones who get to say what we teach in anything that is part of a teacher preparation program. And this course is considered part of that. And so TEA gets to decide when we have a course that has a field experience component. and they've gone back and forth on this one, whether we had one or didn't have one, had one or didn't. And then they get to decide the parameters around which we have those. And they get kind of sticky about that too, which I have an opinion about that, but I'm not going to voice it too much. My daughter works at TEA now, and I have to be careful what I say about TEA, but I have some very particular opinions about the way TEA operates sometimes. But I've been an educator and under the umbrella of TEA for a really long time. And I started my teaching career when I was 21, just a little bit older than you all are, and you may even be 21 by now. But I got out of college early, and way back in the 80s, and began my teaching career. And so I've been an educator for a really long time. And so I've got some pretty strong opinions, and you'll hear about some of those as the semester goes along. But I've been a special educator all of those years. And so I've got a whole lot of experience in a lot of different areas of education. And almost all of those have been in special education in one way or another, as a teacher, as what we call an educational diagnostician. That's a person who identifies disabilities. As a campus administrator, I've been an assistant principal. I've been a special education director. I've worked at a regional education service center. I've worked at in a private practice, and I've worked here at Tarleton. And so I've worked from with kids from as little as 2 or 3 years old, all the way up to graduate students who were older than me, and anything in between. So lots of experiences that I look forward to sharing with you all, particularly those that have to do with students with disabilities. And so the first thing we'll learn about in the first few chapters have to do with the special education process in the public school setting. And then we'll dive into each one of the specific disabilities that we deal with in special education. And then we'll work through each one of those and talk about how the whole system works together. So like I said, we have this field component that we have to do. And I believe I think I wrote in and the hours have varied also. I think I wrote in the syllabus that it's 16 hours. Does anybody remember right off if that's right? I'm looking at my syllabus. I'll find it here in a second. 16 hours, yes. And the department would like for you to do that in 2-hour time slots, 1 time a week for a total of 8 weeks. And so I talked to somebody the other day that was anxious about getting started on that, but I wouldn't worry a whole lot if you haven't gotten it lined up just yet, because we still have the entire semester to get those 8 weeks in. Students who are education majors will have their placement decided for them through our certification office, and they'll place you. They'll get in touch with you and tell you where you're going to be. Unfortunately, if you're not an education major, you have to self-place. And so it'll be up to you to determine where you're going to do those hours. Now, my recommendation to you is if you are a child and family studies major, to let the professors in your department help you. And the same is true for any of the other majors that may be in this class. If you're a kinesiology major, get some advice from your kines professors as to an appropriate place. And for any other major that may land here, if you're a secondary math major, get your folks over in the math department to help guide you. You are not limited to just a school setting if your major is not particularly school related. Now, if your major is school related, then a school setting would be appropriate for you. But for instance, if you're a child and family studies major, a daycare may be more appropriate. If you want to be a child life specialist and work in a hospital setting, then a hospital setting or a clinic of some sort might be a more appropriate field experience for you. So we can kind of think outside the box on this. And I know that COVID is placing a lot of constraints on everybody with field experiences. So we want to be creative in the way we approach this assignment. And remember, it's only 16 hours. It's not a huge time commitment. It's not like clinical teaching where you're in the schools, for the majority of the day, every day. It's a very finite amount of time, 2 hours a week for 8 weeks. That's really not a huge time commitment. So we want to find a placement that will work and that makes sense with your ultimate career goals. Well, you may say, I don't have a lot of career goals yet. Well, then let's talk about that a little bit and see what makes sense for you and find a placement that works. Like I say, education majors, yours is pretty sewn up for you. It's the students who are not education majors where we need to have some creativity. I am not the one who will be placing you. Like I said, you will be self-placing if you are not in education, in the education department. But I think you do need to have some guidance from your department to help you out with this. So there's this paragraph here in the syllabus that hopefully will guide you through that a little bit. There's been some question about the textbook. Unfortunately, the bookstore did not order the correct textbook. They ordered one textbook for everybody that's teaching this class, and I have never used that textbook. I use the book that looks like this. This is the first page of my loose leaf, and it's called Exceptional Students, Not Exceptional Children. So the book that's called Exceptional Children will not work for my class. This is the book I have always used through 3 different editions of this book. And this is the book I'm going to continue to use. And so you will need this book for this class. I don't know exactly where the breakdown in communication came, but unfortunately, you all are the ones who are having to suffer with that because somewhere along the line, some adult didn't pay attention. But whether the fault was in the education office or at the bookstore, I'm not certain. But this is the book that I use and have used for 9 years and will use again this semester. So this is the book that you'll need, and you have to have it to do the work. As I've said to several students who have asked me who have not gotten their book yet for one reason or another, I am more than happy to give you an extended time to get those first few chapters done when your book arrives. And I'm not going to give you, late points for, let's just say the first 3 chapters. If you don't have a book yet. In fact, I'll just give grace to anybody on the first 3 chapters. Okay. So no late points for the first 3 chapters, for anyone. But what you need to do is you need to turn to the back of each chapter. And at the back of each chapter, on the last page of each chapter, you'll find a page that looks like this. And you'll see a heading that says Reflection Topics and Application Activities. Reflection Topics and Application Activities. Those are your reflection topics. It says right there, plain as day, reflection topics. So don't choose any questions other than those. No chapter summary questions, nothing like that. Now, if you got the other book by accident and you already answered chapter 1 questions from that book, we're going to let that go. and that will be your chapter 1 reflection questions. And this has happened another semester historically, and we're going to let that pass. Okay. But if you haven't gotten your book yet, or you haven't done chapter 1 yet, make sure when you do that you find the reflection topics and you pick 2 of these questions. You write the question out on your paper, on your document for me, and then you answer 2 of those questions. These are not difficult questions. Most of them are what I would consider thought-provoking questions. There's not a hard, firm, right or wrong answer, but it does require that you think about the answer and that you reflect back on the chapter that you've read. So you do need to read the chapter. All of the unit test questions come from the chapters. And so reading the chapters is critical to being successful in the class. Most of the reflection topic points come from completing the assignment thoroughly. If you write 1 or 2 or 3 sentences about the reflection topic, that shows a very minimal effort. I would like for you to be thoughtful about it, to give me 5 or 6 sentences about each reflection topic that you answer. So that usually equals, close to a page of writing, not single spaced, double spaced, but, 4, 5, 6 sentences about each one of the reflection topics that you choose. Think back, reflect on your own experiences, things that you have seen or heard from your growing up, your school experiences. If it asks a question about, what would you think about if you were a parent of a child with a disability, then actually sit and ponder that for a few minutes. And what would it be like to have a child with a disability? And how would you embed that experience in your life and then respond to that in a thoughtful way? It's real obvious to me as the grader if you haven't put much thought into it. And so you won't get, the 10 points. You'll get 5 points. And you may think, oh, well, 5 points doesn't matter much. But over the course of the semester, 5, 5, 5, 5 instead of 10, 10, 10, 10 makes a big difference. And I had a student a couple of years ago who decided that she just didn't need to do the reflection topics. She just needed to take the tests. And she did very well on each one of the unit tests because she read her chapters, but she didn't do any of the reflection topics and she failed the course. I think she just didn't do the simple mathematics that showed her, or would have showed her, that you have to complete the reflection topics in order to pass the class. And you need to put some good effort into it. All right. We're also going to have a discussion board each week where you need to have some conversation with your fellow students. And I'll put one of those up either tonight or in the morning, and we'll begin those this week. I have a family issue going on in my life right now that has got me a little bit off balance here at the beginning of this semester. My mother, who is 89, had a stroke the week before Christmas, and she's been in very good health until now. She got COVID over Thanksgiving, and then had a COVID-related stroke. And COVID apparently causes the blood to thicken. And she had this stroke that caused her to be in the hospital all through the Christmas holidays into the new year. And she came home from the hospital the weekend before school started. And then she's had a very up and down time since then. And my sister and I have been back and forth to her house, checking on her and staying the night with her. We haven't actually left her alone at all. And so that has caused me some concern and quite a bit of time away from my computer when I would have rather been paying more attention to school-related topics. So you all give me a little bit of grace, and I'll give you some as well. And Raymond, you are correct. The name of the name of the textbook is Exceptional Students Preparing Teachers for the 21st Century, and it is the 3rd edition. And thank you for putting that in the chat. And it's also in the syllabus. If you need to go back and look, that's on the syllabus page of the course on Canvas. So let's see, I can scroll up to that. Right here under required materials near the top of the syllabus. And the authors are Taylor, Smiley, and Richards. And I know it's easy to get this book confused with the other one because it's called Exceptional Children, and this one is called Exceptional Students. But that one, I believe, is like on the 10th edition, and this one is on the 3rd edition. And again, this one is Exceptional Students. Okay, let's see. With each, you'll see here under course overview, the book is divided into 4 units, and that's the way I divide the course as well. And there's a test over each unit. So we've got chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then a test, and then that second set of chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. Those are what we call high incidence disabilities, the ones that are frequently occurring. And then a test, and then what we call low incidence disabilities, the ones that are infrequently occurring. Chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then other exceptionalities there at the end of the book, chapters 13, 14, and 15. And then we'll add some of those additional topics that I talked about there at the very end as well. As I said, you do need to read the book. We will have a weekly webinar. And then we'll have the discussion board, the reflection topics. With each unit, we have one additional assignment called an application activity, and it's worth 25 points. The first one is a partner activity, and I will post it probably sometime next week. I'll talk about it at our webinar next week. And then I've talked about the field experience. We have 2 other assignments that are that come later in the semester, one that comes about halfway through the semester. It's an annotated web resource assignment. You put together a list of web resources that would be good for teachers, or if you have another career goal that's slightly different than that, you can make it more suitable to your career. But I want it to be focused upon the disability community. And we'll talk more about that as we get a little closer. That's due before before spring break. And then the last one is a project that we have that's due toward the very end of the semester, where you put together a PowerPoint presentation that has to do with an instructional material that you could use in your classroom or in your future position, whatever you hope that to be. And we'll talk a lot more about that as the semester continues. And I'll show you some examples of both of those to kind of guide you in your preparation. That will be due a week or so before the end of the semester. You also do a little video and submit that with your PowerPoint. For exams, no final exam per se. Each exam just deals with the unit that it covers. And so the 4th exam covers the 4th unit, and there's no cumulative final. I do like class participation, and attendance is primarily through participation in the webinar. Since it's an online class, no attendance is required at the weekly webinars, but it is essential really to watch the webinar so that you can get some content information that you'll need to be successful on the tests. And then your professionalism through your writing and discussion board, etc. So if you all have any questions, ask now. And if not, I'm going to talk a little bit about the first 2 chapters. Y'all have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay, then I'm going to stop sharing this document and start sharing this document. Let's see. Okay. Now, this has to do with the first chapter in the book. It's kind of an overview of chapter 1, and I have it actually divided into 2 sections. So I'm going to go through this first section, and then I've got another PowerPoint that looks at the second section. But the chapter talks at the beginning about what is an exceptionality. Oops. So the difference between an impairment and a loss, and is there a difference? What is the difference? An impairment is a loss. An impairment and a disability are actually 2 different things. An impairment is a loss of something, an ability. A disability is considered a limitation. A handicap is a word that we try not to use anymore, because a handicap is really not something that a person has. A handicap is something that is the result of external factors. It's something that society places upon a person. So a person has an impairment, like a speech impairment or an orthopedic impairment, an impairment of the body or the limbs, or something like that, a learning disability maybe, an intellectual disability. But a handicap is something that society places on that person by not allowing them the opportunity to be fully integrated into the rest of society. So if we have a building on campus that doesn't have a ramp going up to it, then we have handicapped the person who's in a wheelchair by not allowing them appropriate access to that building. That person has a physical disability, but we've given them a handicap by not allowing them to have the access that they need to that building. Does that make sense? So the handicap means the result of external factors that we as a society have placed on a person. And a disability is that innate or internal issue that's going on that gives that person the impairment or the loss or the limitation. So we try not to use the word handicap unless we're applying it in this way to say that we've handicapped a person. The only exception to that I can really think of is when we start talking about parking places. We talk about having a handicap parking, and we've never changed the use of that term. We still use that widely, and we say, well, you know, I have a handicap sticker on my car. I'm allowed to park in the handicap parking, and nobody has an issue with that, but we have an issue with using the word handicap in other ways. And so I don't know why the word handicap has been allowed to be so acceptable still in that one context, but not any other. It's kind of strange. And then the last bullet on this page is talking about something called person first language. And this is a really hard one to begin to think about if you have not been surrounded by people with disabilities for very long. An example of this would be to say, there's a blind man that stands on the corner. Well, a more appropriate way to say that, rather than calling the person a blind man, would be to say the man who is blind, or the man with blindness, or the man with a visual impairment, or the man with a loss of vision and say man first instead of blindness first. So that's person first language. We say the person before we say what the handicap or the disability or the impairment is. We don't say the disability first, we say the disability last, and we say the person first. So we say the person with, or the person who has, and we name the person before we name the disability or the impairment. And that humanizes the person more rather than making it all about their disability. I follow a lady on Instagram who recently had, well, about a year ago, had a child with Down syndrome. And she was talking about this very thing. She said that she was, I think she said she was at some sort of a clinic with her child, and somebody that was helping her, one of the assistants or aides at the clinic, said, oh, the Down syndrome kids are always hard for us to control when we're giving them shots or something like that. The Down syndrome kids. And she was highly offended by the term Down syndrome kids, because she said, my child is a whole lot more than Down syndrome. Down syndrome does not describe her, does not identify her. She's not a Down syndrome kid. She happens to have Down syndrome, but she's so much more than that label, than that disability. So we don't want to say the Down syndrome child. We want to say the child who has Down syndrome, or the little girl with the disability. And this little girl's name is Annie. So Annie, who has Down syndrome, may be difficult to control when she gets a shot because she can't communicate her discomfort or something to that effect. But we don't want to say the Down syndrome kid. We don't want to say the wheelchair boy. I had this discussion in a class a year or so ago with a young lady in the room who was in a wheelchair. And she said, I get this all the time. She said, when I was in school growing up, I was called the wheelchair girl. And that's an awful way to be identified because of the chair in which you sit. And so we want to switch out of this thinking. And most people don't do it with any malice in their hearts when they say it. It's just an identifier. But it's hurtful to the person who has the disability or to their family members because it dehumanizes the individual and it makes them totally wrapped up in their disability rather than their personhood. And so we want to approach language this semester as we begin to talk about people who have disabilities and understand their disabilities better and become educators in a lot of different venues with family members and children who have disabilities. We want to talk about the person first and then the disability as kind of the afterthought. And so try to begin putting your own spin on that and integrating that into your language as the semester goes on. So there's a two-pronged test for identifying disabilities in kids in schools. And first of all, we have to say that the person has a disability. We identify the presence of a disability. They do have the disability, but then there's a second part before we can say that a person is eligible for special education services in schools. And that is that there is an adverse effect on their educational performance and a need for specialized instruction caused by that disability. So just the presence of a disability alone is not enough to generate the need for special education. You also have to have this adverse effect on educational performance that rises to the level to need specialized instruction. So an example of that would be maybe the child who has a visual impairment. Maybe they've got really low vision or maybe partial blindness. But is it such that it's bad enough that it impacts their educational performance and they need some specialized instruction? Well, it would depend on how severe the visual impairment is. And we'd need a lot of information from their ophthalmologist to know the answer to that. But we can get that, and that's part of the determination of that disability for us in schools, is to get all of that information from an ophthalmologist that will tell us how disabling is this condition for the child with a visual impairment. Does it impact their educational performance to a level that they would need specialized instruction? Do they need Braille? Do they need special books for students with low vision? Do they need large print? Do they need a magnifier of some sort? Do they need a cane to get around the school? Do they need an assistance animal? Those kinds of things. And if they need those specialized kinds of tools or instruction, then that student would have both elements that they need from that two-pronged disability test. And that applies to every disability that we have in schools. And so we've got several laws that govern disability in schools. We've got the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, that we've all heard of. That was passed in 1990, and that applies to the big world outside of schools. You know, that's why we have Braille numbers outside of our doors on our Tarleton classrooms. It's why we have ramps on our buildings. It's the reason we have a lot of the accommodations that we do all over our country. Interestingly, though, you know, it does say Americans with Disabilities Act. This is not a law that you'll find in other countries necessarily. Much of the world does not provide any accommodation for people with disabilities. The second one there is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It was originally passed in 1975 under a different name, but it was the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. We used the word handicap back then to refer to kids, but we've changed the name since then to, as you can see, it's person first language, individuals with disabilities. And this is the law that dictates what we do in schools for kids with disabilities. It tells us everything that we have to do for kids with disabilities in schools. And then the one down there at the bottom is Section 504 of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And a lot of people have heard of this because of this section, Section 504 of this law is what a lot of kids in school access in order to get accommodations because of dyslexia or because of attention deficit disorder. They have Section 504 accommodations. So a lot of people have heard of 504 accommodations. That's something a little bit different than special ed. If the disability is not significant enough to need special ed, you can qualify for Section 504 accommodations. And like I say, a lot of people have heard of that, even though they don't really know what it means. How many kids are actually in special education? Well, the national average is about 13%. About 13% of kids are identified as having disabilities in any population. A few years ago, well, for many, many years, the Texas Education Agency told us in Texas that we had to keep our numbers at 8.5%, which is pretty crazy. Because that's, as you can see, significantly less than the national average. And there really wasn't a good reason why. I think somebody down at TEA just kind of decided that that was a good number. And the bad thing about that is the number can vary from school district to school district. Not every district is exactly the same. I don't know where you guys are from, but when I have this class face-to-face, I have everybody just kind of tell us where they're from. And some kids are from rural areas, some kids are from urban areas. And if you have a school that's the only school in a community, like in Stephenville, we have one high school. And so one high school, you're going to be about that national average. But let's say you're in Fort Worth ISD. I live in Fort Worth, and there is some variation between the high schools in Fort Worth. If you've spent any time in Fort Worth, you know that there's a few neighborhoods in Fort Worth that are more elite than, and this is true in any large urban area. And so around Pascal High School, around Arlington Heights High School, you have some neighborhoods that are wealthier. And it doesn't seem right, but the special ed population is lower at those schools. That doesn't seem fair, it doesn't seem right, but it's true. And so it works out statistically that when you're looking at a whole population, it mirrors the national average. When you're looking at subsets of the population, it doesn't necessarily mirror the whole population. But in 2018, several of the school districts around Texas took exception with this rule that the Texas Education Agency had for Texas schools to keep their numbers around 8.5%. And they said that there were a lot of kids that were getting left out of special education because districts had this target that they had to keep to. And they filed suit against the Texas Education Agency, and they won. And the U.S. Department of Education in Washington, D.C. Put a corrective action plan in place for the Texas Education Agency. And they said, you all need to fix this. And when they did, TEA took this expectation away. And what do you think happened? Well, then the Texas average started going up. So when we allow the natural order of things to take place, things usually level out about 12 or 13%, because that's where the actual number of children with disabilities actually rests when we leave it alone. So there are 13 categories of disability that we actually work with in our schools. They are passed down from the federal level, and we use those across the country. And what I usually do is I pass out this list right here, and the 13 disability categories are embedded here. And I'll just tell you all right now what they are. I don't think I can write on this screen. I don't think I have my markup on this. But a learning disability is a category. A lot of people think that attention deficit disorder is a category. It's not a category by itself. Cerebral palsy is a disability, but it's not a category. A seizure disorder can be a disability, but it's not a category. Emotional disturbance is a disability category. Failure on the STAR test is why a lot of kids get referred for special education, but it is not a category. Multiple disabilities is a category. Orthopedic impairment is a category. Early childhood, it's a placement where a lot of kids go for special intervention when they're young, but it's not a category. Speech impairment is a category. Now, limited English proficient is a descriptor of a lot of children, and it's why a lot of people think kids have disabilities, but it's not a category. And we should never place children in special education because they're limited English proficient. A lot of children also get referred for special education because they're slow learners, but also not a category. Depression is a marker of the category of emotional disturbance, but not a category of its own. Other health impairment is a category, and a lot of things that are health related feed into that. One of those is attention deficit disorder. It falls under the category of other health impairment, along with anything else that's health related, like a heart murmur or asthma, or anything that requires a doctor's diagnosis and impacts a child at school. Asperger's syndrome is not a category. It falls under another big category, which you've probably heard of, which is autism. Children who are at risk certainly are inclined to fall into special education at some point, but that is not a category. Work inhibited. Some of us are work inhibited sometimes, but not a category. Visual impairment is a category. Traumatic brain injury is a category. Free and reduced lunch, those are our kiddos that are low socioeconomic status, and many of them do have disabilities, but not a category of disability by itself. Bilingual, not a category for disability. Intellectual disability is a category. Autism is. Down syndrome is not. It's a disability that sometimes results in an intellectual disability or a physical disability of some other sort, but it is not a standalone category. A chronic absenteeism can contribute to low achievement in school, but it is not a category of disability. Dyslexia falls under the category of learning disability. Now, deaf-blind is a very small category, but it is a category of its own. And these are children like Helen Keller, who have deafness and blindness, both to some degree. It doesn't necessarily have to be total deafness and total blindness, but both of those sensory disabilities impact the child to some degree. Oppositional defiant behavior is not a disability. It's a behavior problem that is outside the realm of special education. An auditory impairment is a disability. Reluctant learner is not. Non-categorical early childhood is a disability category. It's for our little children ages 3 through 5, when we're not quite sure what's going on with them yet. And we'll talk more about that later in the semester. A developmental delay is what we call that group of children in the early childhood category in other states, but not in Texas. So developmental delay is a category in other places, but not here. Lacks motivation, that's kind of like our work inhibited kids. A conduct disorder is a behavior problem, but it doesn't fall under special education. And pervasive developmental disorder is a type of autism, so it falls under the autism category. So I did that really fast for the sake of time. If we had a big group, we would have gone through that slowly and let you see where all your mistakes were. So, as I said in the introduction, there are high incidence disabilities and low incidence disabilities. Some are frequently occurring and some are infrequently occurring. Like I said a moment ago, deaf-blind does not happen very often, so it's a low incidence disability. Our most high incidence disability, our most frequently occurring disability is a learning disability. That's the disability that we see more often than any other. And then within learning disabilities, the most frequently occurring learning disability is a reading disability. And dyslexia is one of those reading disabilities. So we've known lots and lots of kids who are dyslexic, and some of you are probably dyslexic. That is the most frequently occurring learning disability. And like I said, learning disabilities are the most frequently occurring disabilities. They're also invisible. You can't tell when somebody is walking down the street with a learning disability. And many people, once they reach adulthood, disguise those learning disabilities very well, and you would never know that they had them. There is some fluctuation there, and we have to ask ourselves why. Well, some low incidence disabilities are increasing, and one of those is autism. And probably the reason that the autism category is growing is because we're getting better and better at identifying autism. Another reason some of our low incidence disability categories are growing is because we're getting better at saving the lives of children who would have, in years gone by, not have survived low birth weight, premature birth. I had a former student who had a baby a few weeks ago, and the baby was born at 21 weeks gestation. Now, a typical pregnancy goes for 40 weeks. So that baby was only halfway cooked. And interestingly, in some places, abortions are still allowed at up to 26 weeks. So in many places, that baby could still have been aborted. But that baby has now been in the NICU in the Dallas area for, I believe, 3 months, and is thriving. I think she weighs 3 pounds now. She was born at 1 pound something. And just, I mean, looked like a little teeny tiny developing fetus, which is what she was. But she's alive. Now, oftentimes babies that are born that premature have visual impairments, sometimes total blindness, other kinds of developmental disabilities. Sometimes they have to have a lot of surgeries before they can even come home from the hospital. And this baby has had some serious issues already in the 3 months that she's been in the hospital. So I'll be interested to see how she develops. But those kinds of births are happening more frequently now, and those babies are surviving because of our advances in medical science. And so those categories are growing. So special education and related services. Your book talks about the fact that special education it's a service, it's not a place. Most of us may think back on our experiences in school, where special education was a place down the hall, or maybe even out in the outbuildings. I hope not for most of you, that special ed had come a long way from that by the time that you were in school. But you may have just thought of special education as a room down the hall where kids with disabilities were. It should not be that. It's a service that students receive, and they're not going to a place. They should be integrated into regular classrooms all over the school, receiving services alongside their general education peers. There is a continuum of services, and there are a number of related services that go along with that special education label, where students receive occupational therapy, physical therapy, music therapy, speech and language services, adapted PE, all kinds of things that happen all over the school building, and not just in a designated place down the hall away from general education. Okay, that's the end of that one. And you know what? I think we may just call it a night with that right there. We've gone an hour. I may do another webinar and post it with the second half of this, but not make you guys just hang on for it. And then I think maybe I'll just do chapter 2 next week. We'll just kind of catch up as we go, and not try to stretch it too much this week. Any questions about that first part of chapter 1?
No, ma'am. I don't have any.
Then if you guys don't have any questions, I think we'll call it a night. And I'll be back here next week. I've got office hours all all day Thursday though. And you can shoot me an email or a text or give me a phone call or whatever you need anytime between now and then if you've got any questions. And I'll post discussion board, and I'll post a bit of information too about extending due dates. Okay. All right. I'm going to close out tonight, and I'll see you guys around. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.